Hi everybody, welcome back to Christian Called Conservative. As always, consider subscribing to the channel. Give this a thumbs up for me if this was informative to you. Tell a friend, share it with a friend. So, let's talk. I am sick of hearing about January 6th as this insurrection, as people trying to take over the government. Look, this was not insurrection. In my opinion, I'm no historian or I'm not a scholar of words, but according to the definition of an insurrection, let's take a look. As always, I want to look up the definition. So, an insurrection, a violent uprising against an authority or government. Some other words, let's see. Rebellion, revolt, uprising, unrest, civil disobedience. Okay, look, I'm not trying to say that this was just a light day, a normal day in our history. It was bad. It was very bad. But to call it an insurrection, I'm not really sure about that. In one of my other videos, President Biden said that it was the worst day since 9/11. 9/11? What an insult to those who died on 9/11. And then I'm hearing some other networks saying things like, it's the worst attack on the Capitol, most violent and destructive assault, the worst security breach. No one has attacked Congress since the War of 1812. A lot of these networks are comparing it to the War of 1812. Okay, so you know me. I like to look stuff up before I come to you guys with information. The thing is, I can think of some other days that was worse than this insurrection. I can think of days like 9/11 and the days of riots after George Floyd's death. This January 6th event, although it was bad, don't get me wrong, but I can think of some other days that were worse. And to say the War of 1812, I'm honestly just sick. Okay, so let's do some research and we can see which days were really bad. War of 1812, the riots of the summer of 2020 after George Floyd's death, 9/11. Let's look at some numbers. Okay, so 19 to 25 people. Oh, by the way, I'll put my references on the bottom in the description. 19 to 25 people died during the riots, and I'm sure there's more than that. $1 to $2 billion in 14 days. That's not even in total with all the riots going on all over really the world. But this was only in the first 14 days of the riots after George Floyd's death. $1 to $2 billion with a B dollars in damages. Compared to the insurrection, one person died. I know other links say 5 people died, like, for example, Brian Sicknick. Brian Sicknick did not die as a result to, they're saying someone hit him with a fire hose, fire hydrant. No, fire extinguisher. What happened with him was, according to the research, that he actually suffered a stroke. He had gone back to work and then he wasn't feeling well and then he had passed out. And he went back to work, had passed out, and he had suffered a stroke, he had a blood clot, and he was on a ventilator before he died. The riots are still going on versus the insurrection lasted a couple of hours and then they were able to go back to work. They were able to do what they were supposed to be doing, as opposed to several businesses in the area have been burned down as a result to the riots. Okay, let's continue. And at the Capitol, they're saying 2.5 million with an M, and NPR is saying 30 million in damages at the Capitol. But again, the George Floyd riots were in the billions of dollars. Okay, so then I said, let's look at the War of 1812. The War of 1812, 15,000 soldiers died during that war. That war lasted for 2 years and 8 months. Let me remind you again. One person died at the Capitol breach. That was Ms. Abbott, who was shot by random cop A that we still don't know who the cop was. Okay, War of 1812 lasted 2 years, 8 months, and the Capitol breach lasted a couple of hours. So then I said to myself, let's look at 9/11, since our president said this was like the worst that has ever happened since 9/11. Okay, 3,000 people were killed, not to mention those who had possibly committed suicide as a result of PTSD or some other mental health illnesses. That still counts. And property damage, 100 billion with a B. Economic damage, 4 trillion with a T. $4 trillion in economic damages, $7 billion in compensation, $5 million to fix up the Pentagon, another $5 million for overtime for those first responders at New York. And then I remind you again, one person died at the Capitol and it lasted for a couple of hours. And the damages are in the millions, not the trillions. See, here's my thing. Look, would it be really good to have a group of people to find out what really happened? Yes, a bipartisan group that did a really intense and fair search as to who to blame. Sure, why not? But we know it's not going to be fair. But my issue is comparing what happened on January 6th as the worst that's ever happened since the War of 1812. That's the stupidest thing I've heard thus far. So let's make sure we're looking at the research. We're looking at the information that is provided by credible websites, credible news people, not the nonsense of these other networks that are saying it's the worst that's ever happened since the War of 1812. It's so ridiculous. Okay, so then I was thinking about one of the anchors, I won't say from where, what his name is. He was saying how no one has breached the Congress, no one has attacked the Congress since the War of 1812. Okay, so then I was doing my homework, as always, and I was thinking to myself, is this accurate? Well, let me give you some info. 1998, Capitol Hill officers were shot in the Capitol. Detective John Gibson and Officer Jacob Chestnut. Apparently this shooter was going on this shooting spree and those two officers were shot and killed. 1983, a bomb went off inside the Senate. 1954, a gunman shot inside the House of Representatives and 5 members of Congress were shot. So a gunman got into the building and shot 5 members of Congress. 1954. And in 1915, somehow a stick of dynamite was thrown in the Capitol building outside the Senate room. So, all you networks that are trying to get people revved up, as always, with false information, here I am giving you the info. Let's pretend we didn't even do any research. I want you to think for a second. The War of 1812 versus an event that took a couple of hours. War of 1812, couple of hours. War of 1812, 15,000 people died. The Capitol breach, 1. 9/11, 3,000 people died. 3,000 people died. The riots of the summer after George Floyd's death, like I said, some of the research is saying 19 people, some are saying 25, and the numbers keep rising. So I'm actually sick and disgusted of these networks throwing this information that is just false. And it really is just stupid. At least they can come up with something that's a little bit more realistic. It would have been better if they came up with something that made a little bit more sense as opposed to the War of 1812. So look, as always, I encourage us to do our research. Let's not stay on one side of the fence. Let's look at the other side too, to make sure we're not just given storylines to get us revved up and say, oh yeah, that's true, it was an insurrection. Look, whatever you want to call it, I don't care what you call it, but let's make sense of the situation. War, couple of hours. Logic. Look, as always, like I say, do your research, ask questions, bring your questions here. I would love to do the research to find out, what's really accurate. So anyway, that's all today. Short and sweet. Just chatting about the insurrection or the Capitol breach or whatever you want to call it. Do your homework. Don't let people tell you what to think. Ask yourself, does this make sense? Anyway, as always, Thank you so much for joining Christian Called Conservative. Consider subscribing to the channel. Tell a friend. Let's get our numbers up, guys. I want to keep this dialogue going. I want us talking, asking questions, challenging the narrative and the foolishness that we hear. Is it true or is it just fluff? So put your comments on the bottom. I thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Let's keep talking. Let's keep getting knowledge. Let's not accept foolishness. So thank you again. You take care. God bless.